I shot a video, but you can simply search the term for NDAA is a hoax. You cannot legalize tyranny. Now, tyrants can criminally carry it out if not resisted, both through information warfare, the truth, and physically if your back's against the wall. I mean, Hitler didn't have really the legal standing to go into Poland, but he did. Or to go into France, but he did, because he had people that would follow his criminal orders. Same thing with the Redcoats. Same thing with white abolitionists who were hung by the hundreds for trying to free black slaves. Their argument was, as a Christian, I don't believe that these people are animals, and I think they're free souls and should be free. They called them kooks and nuts and lunatics, but in the end, their sacrifice came out on top, and that's what scares evil. That's why I always want you to think it's invincible. And so they might try to carry out secret arrest of citizens, disappearing us into black sites, black holes, but it only convicts the establishment as just as bad as we thought they were and verifies everything we've said, and they're basically tattling on themselves. They're confessing in their hubris. In their attempt to intimidate people, they've gone from just lying about New World Order to going, yeah, you bet. We're spying on patriots. Yeah, we'll arrest you. Yeah, we're getting ready for some new terror attacks we're going to blame on you. I mean, Democrats are putting out all these policy reports saying, gee, Oklahoma sure helped us. A new one's coming, and we're going to arrest everybody. I mean, that's even on Fox News. So now they've moved into kind of a cornered, hissing, mangy, wolf in a corner snarling at us. The problem is they've put us in a corner. So there's no getting out of this without a fight. The question is, what type of fight will it be? Do we work extra hard now to educate police and military that will be the enforcers of this, where the rubber meets the road? Or do we just shoot our mouths off and pile up giant amounts of guns and just say, well, let them come get it? I'd rather work as hard as I can to avert this, and then if it comes, our numbers are that much greater. That's the only sensible course. And so you cannot legalize tyranny. It's very, very simple. And again, he's founder and director of Oath Keepers, served as U.S. Army paratrooper until disabled in a rough terrain parachuting accident during a night jump, former firearms instructor, former member of Ron Paul's D.C. staff. Stewart currently writes the monthly Enemy at the Gates column, or did for SWAT Magazine. He's a graduate of Yale Law School, where his paper, Solving the Puzzle of Enemy Combatant Status, won Yale's Miller Prize for Best Paper on the Bill of Rights. And he also is taught at the U.S. military history at Yale, was a Yale research scholar, and is also writing a book on the dangers of applying the laws of war to the American people, which has now happened. Oathkeepers.org. Okay, Stuart, let's give people a snapshot of history, but first let's get into my breakdown. And would you like to elaborate on that or add anything to it?
Well, I think you're correct. That's the response we have to have. I mean, we need to prepare for the very worst. And so, but on the way there, like you said, we have a very narrow window of opportunity to raise the awareness of the American people and to do all we can through peaceful means. And while we're doing that, just the same way the founders did, they exhausted all their peaceful means, but they also rallied more people to the cause, won more people over, and steeled them up and hardened them, got them ready for the confrontation. And so that's what we have to do, both things. And so what I encourage people to do is go look at what Jefferson and Madison did in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798, which were a gross violation of the First Amendment. They did two things at the same time. One, they nullified. They went to the states and said, you have an obligation to interpose and nullify. You said, anything contrary to the Constitution is null and void from inception. It is not law. It is nothing. So that's the attitude we have to have. We do not give it any recognition whatsoever. You can say they passed an unconstitutional, invalid statute, but it is not lawful. We do not recognize it. That's what Jefferson and Madison did. They didn't go to the federal courts and beg them to recognize that this was a gross violation of the First Amendment. They went to the state legislature and said, you have an obligation. So they nullified. For those who don't know, they tried to bring in tyranny just a few years after our country got on its feet, and the original founders got together and said, lock and load, we're going to try to peacefully back them off, but if they don't, it's another war. Right. When the Alien Sedition Acts criminalized speech. You had newspaper editors and reporters and writers being arrested for criticizing the president, John Adams, the second president of the United States. And the Federalists were doing this during the kind of quasi-war with France. So throughout history, it's always during wartime that they try to convince you must give up your liberty in the name of fighting the war. And so the Federalists, in the name of fighting the war against the French, the undeclared war against the French, tried to silence dissent. And so Jefferson and Madison, like I said, they did two things at once. They said it's null and void from inception in the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. The states stood up. But they also started a whole new political party, and they swept the Federalists out of office in what's now called the Revolution of 1800. Jefferson was elected president, and they swept all the Federalists out of Congress. And so that's what we need to do right now in response to this atrocious, unconstitutional, intolerable act. So this is our
and history repeats itself. If we didn't have such fraud and modern mind control, undoubtedly he'd be the presumptive nominee. He would defeat Obama, and we would see a repeat. We're just in worse states than our founders were. Yeah,
Ron Paul is Jefferson. Let me take off my Oathkeeper hat for a second and just say that as an individual, I endorse Ron Paul. As an individual veteran of combat arms and airborne, and as a legal scholar, there is nobody else out there who is going to defend the Constitution like he will. All the rest of them would have been just like McCain, who wrote the NDAA. Obama has already committed treason. He's killing American citizens. He's declared himself an elected dictator, essentially. And the rest of them up there, Romney, Gingrich, Santorum, they'd all be the same. So, this is your Jefferson. Ron Paul is the closest thing to a modern Jefferson there is. He's like Jefferson reincarnate. And if you don't vote for him, you are furthering us on that road to having no choice but to fight for our freedom again.
Isn't it curious as how many historians and scholars have noted that history repeats? I mean, it doesn't so much repeat as it rhymes. Who was it that said history rhymes? That was Mark Twain. I mean, it really does go in these cycles.
Well, it does, and it's always warfare. If you look at after the Alien Sedition Acts, they put that genie back in the bottle. They had the peaceful revolution of 1800 took care of it, but then came the Civil War, and it was in the Civil War, in the name again of national security, that Lincoln became essentially an elected dictator. He imprisoned newspaper editors. He imprisoned congressmen. He even wrote an arrest warrant out for Chief Justice Taney when he balked against his suspension of habeas corpus. So, he just decided he was going to do whatever he wanted to do, and all of his supporters in the Republican Party, the original Republican Party, were all for it. And in the North, this is the precedent. This is the first time that the power of the president as commander-in-chief was used against the American people. He claimed the authority, much like Bush and Obama, he claimed the authority to apply the laws of war, not just to the breakaway southern states that had seceded and become their own country. He also applied the laws of war to northerners. And the Supreme Court in 1866 in the Ex parte Milligan case ruled that unconstitutional. But that's a case that came after the war was over. And it doesn't matter, though. Whenever they're taking over states today, they always go back to what Lincoln did, which in the North was undoubtedly classical tyranny. I mean, I understand the more sophisticated nuances of the British manipulating the South and all of it. It's always a double game. But undoubtedly, and then Stanton after that and executing people extrajudicially. And in modern times, they're pointing at that and saying they'll use it against us. Well, exactly. They sweep under the rug the fact that the Supreme Court ruled all of that completely unconstitutional. In Ex parte Milligan, in this case, it was a case of a man who was accused of violating the laws of war. He was a citizen of Indiana. He was a civilian, but he was accused of violating the laws of war. And Lincoln had detained 15,000 American Northerners under military jurisdiction, and he had tried almost 5,000 of them by military tribunal. And this guy was one of those. And so they said, look, the laws of war apply to him, and therefore a military tribunal is all he's going to get. That was the argument of the government lawyers. And in fact, they said this of the Bill of Rights. They said, these in truth are all peace provisions of the Constitution, and like all other conventional and legislative laws and enactments, are silent amidst arms.
Stay there. We're going to be right back. Stuart Rhodes, we're going to go back to that quote on the other side. This is key. Know your history, folks. There are. Yeah, the New World Order says they're doing all this to keep us safe. But they're not doing that, are they? You know, Stuart, looking at history, and I want to continue here with you on the history, and then look at what's happening with Ron Paul right now and take some calls. But tyrants behave the same as well. They always have to hire a bunch of people that'll follow any order. So then over a short period of time, the very worst gravitate into the positions of power, and so the tyranny degenerates quickly and always causes a rebellion against it, because even the sheep are forced to stand up just for self-preservation. So there's a wild frenzy that ensues, and we're now seeing just government getting crazier and wilder and more arrogant and frothing by the moment. Please continue. You've gotten up to the Civil War.
Right. In that case, about the use of military tribunal against an American citizen in the North, the Supreme Court in 1866, the government lawyers argued the exact same thing we're hearing now. They said, by the Constitution as originally adopted, no limitations were put upon the war-making and war-conducting powers of Congress and the president. And then as a fallback, they said, finally, if the military tribunal has no jurisdiction, the petitioner may be held as a prisoner of war, aiding with arms the enemies of the United States, and held under the authority of the United States until the war terminates, which is exactly the argument that Bush made, and Obama, and now Congress in the NDAA. The same argument that the powers of the commander-in-chief are unlimited.
Yeah, if you've got such proof that somebody is aiding a foreign military, put the proof up. That's why we have trials. Oh, no, not only will we secretly arrest you, we'll never even have a public trial, and no one must know that we grabbed you. I mean, that's open tyranny right there. That's always the greatest threat.
Well, the Constitution mandates in Article 3, Section 2, that all crimes must be tried by jury. And then Article 3, Section 3, defines the crime of treason. And it defines it as making war against the United States or aiding its enemies. That is the definition of treason. And so today they're circumventing that trial requirement, very plain text of the treason clause, and they're circumventing the Bill of Rights just like the Lincoln administration did.
Well, let's take that plain reading. If you're waging war or aiding the enemies, the Congress is pretty much globalist run. They actually fit the original treason definition. They're waging war against our Bill of Rights, Constitution, our free market, our private property, our sovereignty, our borders. They are the tyrants. I don't just say that. They are traitors. They are treasonous.